Okay. Since I'm in East Coast, it's proper for me to begin by saying good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are, good night, and good time, wherever you are, whatever time it is. It's my pleasure to host this particular event. And as most of you know who are members of SDIG, we provide safe and open, inclusive engagement and awareness generation space. Individuals as well as groups educate us through their postings, share members' stories, hosting webinars and discussion on local and global issues. And in course of doing this, we help organizations, profit and non-profit, to look at their policies and practices in order to shape the way they deal with issues of equity and social justice in their organizations. Today is not different, but today we are hosting two of our own. Mr. Robert Mesel, who is a global specialist in traveling and getting to know people. He certainly speaks more languages that I can count in my fingers. So if you need to know more about his language skills, the places he had visited, about more than 50 countries, and in each occasion, he does something most people don't do. He humbly gets to know the people rather than making judgment. And in course of getting to know the people, he really understands them. They develop what we call trusting relationship, which endures more than some of the ones we have here. Quick relationship, and sometimes it's based on something somebody wants, rather than creating an environment where honesty prevails, we trust one another and do things the way we should do it. So this session is gonna begin by having our guests introduce themselves, because I'm very passionate about what they do, that if I let myself do that, it may take more time than we need for them to answer the questions we may have. So I'm gonna leave it to them. And the second part will be, I will ask them a couple of questions, and then we go to the fun part, where participants will be able to ask questions, and you could get idea of who they are. If they shy away from saying it, I wouldn't mind coming in, but I'm confident that they will be able to talk about the wonderful things they've done that actually brought them to this space. And the audience question, which is the best, we're gonna do that. And at the end of that, we're gonna ask our guests, in this case, to make some closing remarks that will enable us to continue the cause of fighting for equity and social justice for all. Okay, without further saying, I will go to Robert. Robert, could you tell us about, if you could do that in 4 minutes, we will be very appreciative.
Sure, Dr. Noya, I can save you time. Everything you said is perfectly accurate. Done. I'm just kidding. Right. I'll add a little bit more, but what you did say is it's wonderful, and I'm humbled. And I think you touched upon, you know, I've never heard it said that way before, actually, but you touched on a core of who I am and what I do. And that is really, you know, not just traveling, right, but traveling with intention and traveling to better understand folks, really getting into conversations, deeper conversations, to understand culture, to understand who people really are, how they function and why, which has led to this global career that I have. And as you mentioned as well, I speak several languages, and a lot of that has been because of the travels and the passion and the interest to better understand people. I started to learn that as I traveled, I could only get so far in understanding people without speaking their native tongue, especially in more rural areas where English might not be spoken. So that really spurred me to learn an additional 4 languages to better be able to communicate with the people where I was, whether I was living there, traveling for an extended period of time, spending some time with friends or family, and so on. So that's a bit of a recap or a summary. I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Noya.
Thank you very much. I think you well summarized this. So I'm not gonna pick on that. As you were talking, I saw Malika, who has had similar experience, smiling and shaking her head because she has learned just as you did. So that's really heartwarming. Okay, let's go to our very own Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Karen Walker. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure, no, thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining each of you today. I have retired from the Marine Corps, 21 years of service, and it's taught me a lot. It's shaped me to where I am today, but nothing about it was easy, and I will tell anybody that. You'll be challenged to do it, but if you are up for the challenge, I mean, it's certainly worth it in a lot of ways. I also am an organizational psychologist, and I understand if people don't know quite what that involves, most of my family doesn't still, but it's really, I get pretty nerdy about studying people at work, and that's kind of what I do, is the human behavior of people at work all along that pipeline. And so that has afforded me the opportunity to work with several different groups, whether they're government, commercial, academia, nonprofit, and helping them understand, how people, which are a part of all of our businesses, are so important, but also our leaders, for them to be able to continue to have self-awareness. So know yourself and knowing your people. But that's a lot of the work I do as well, if it's involved in organizational development, focusing on that end, or on the measurements perspective of building psychometrics, different assessments to help organizations do those types of interventions. So it's a brief summary.
Thank you very much. I must also say something that a kind of announcement. I'm excited that in spite of all these things Dr. Walker does, she has developed an idea that I think is awesome, which will help us to get more together. That is, members of SDIG in your respective locations, whether you're teaching or you're wherever you may be, she will be giving you opportunity to shed light on what we are doing, and that will be continuous. And that will include whatever profession you have, she will be doing that, and we're gonna having some really good work. And it's gonna be partnership between SDIG and KW Productions. So you be tuned in, you might be called, and when you are called, you'll be prepared to not only state what you do, but also figure how you can push it out. Because we're gonna develop another army of media gurus. I am not very good in media, but we're working on that. It's gonna be really excellent. So thank you, Dr. Walker, for that particular one. Now, I'm gonna quickly go to questions. I know that I could be asking you questions, but I really prefer to hear from the audience, and we have a lot of them. To that end, my first question would be going to Robert. So Robert, you ready? considering all these wonderful things you've had stated, supposing President Joe Biden were to be watching you, seeing what you've done, more importantly, going into reading the work you do, and then you say, wow. And he calls you and says, Mr. Robert, I need you. You know, when you go to these countries, you get people engaging with one another and the joy that goes along with it, especially when they're honest with themselves, identify themselves, treat people fairly, the joy and the growth associated with it. And when I say that, it's not necessarily material wealth, because here, people always focus on material wealth. There's some other wealths that people who may have material wealth don't lack those ones. So if he calls you and says, Mr. Robert, I need you. I need you to infuse those ideas, those experiences into shaping our people to get to know one another in a genuine way, to begin to care one another, for one another, to eradicate this thing we are in, the virus we are in, and what he has driven to that may have been there, that is institutional racism. And you are now charged with responsibility. Mr. Robert, Michelle, what are you gonna do?
Dr. Noye, thank you for that wonderful question. The first thing I'm gonna do is have my phone ready and not miss that phone call, because I am not letting the president go to voicemail. But when we think about what would I say to the president, how would I respond to that? It's a wonderful question. And, you know, I would employ some of the same tactics that I use in my cross-cultural training and that I use in my travel coaching, and that really stem from my personal interactions with people all over the world. When we're looking to address issues of systemic racism, right? How can we make positive change? What I've seen is, with interacting with folks all over the world, yes, we're different. Yes, we have cultural differences. Yes, we speak different languages. And there are differences in appearance, but in the core of who we are, there are so many more similarities than there are differences. And the challenge is there are also a lot of misunderstandings. We tend to assume a lot of things. We see things, we think we understand them, but oftentimes we don't. I know personally, because I've been in that boat many a time. I've thought something, and after a frank conversation, I learned that I had it wrong, right? So I think one of the most powerful things we can do is to have these engaging, real, raw, and open conversations with people, with our neighbors, with the people we misunderstand most, with the people who we feel, if there's any tension or, you know, perceived injustice, these are the people that we need to have open conversations with. So if we could facilitate a program for open discussions and really learning about people who are different than us, and it would create massive change.
Thank you very much. I hope that the president is listening. I hope that he's listening. Well, Dr. Walker, as I look at all your accomplishments, litany of them, I'm only going to mention a few. Retiring from Marine and working for the Department of Justice and Housing and other urban development. Upon that, serving as a professor, helping to shape those doing their dissertations, among other things. And most importantly, the ongoing program you're championing, which will be titled, What's Really Going On? To use that and focus on communication, how people engage to know what's going on, sharing those things, which is along the line with our own work. We learn through the postings, through conferences, and things like this. If President Biden were to look at those accomplishments, coupled with the one you are doing on race, research on personnel and psychological dimensions of human behavior, then he asks you to come up with a way to change course, especially with the issue of the double pandemics, where we have governors saying to the people that you don't have to use masks, undermining medical professionals. And the other one, which gave birth through the action of the virus, which exposed the institutional racism that is so ingrained in our society. He goes overt and covert. Then he says, doctor, we need you to come up with something that will work, because we believe you have what it takes to do it honestly and fairly. What would you do?
Well, thank you for that. I tell him he got the right woman for the job. That I, as a Marine, of course, we take on any challenge. So my other Marines out there that are listening. But overall, I think that adults, we learn best by doing. And so practical exercises and practical application for this cultural responsiveness really is what would need to be enacted. And a series of kind of, showing and demonstrating from the top really how this should be done. And I think a lot of times we see how perhaps it shouldn't be done when we watch our even, politicians and people in these positions that need to make decisions, unwilling to even sit down and have a conversation with each other. And I think that if we're able to demonstrate by leading by example and start giving some practical tools to our leaders to help them to navigate some of these difficult conversations and difficult situations that they're put into by listening, right, and asking more curious questions of each other, then I think that can start helping us to teach those coming after us how to have conversations. And that's a lot of the work that I get involved in, is kind of helping people have adult conversations, but giving them the skill sets to do that, I think, is most important. So for some frameworks around, what are curious questions? They don't begin with why as a thing there. Why puts people automatically on the defensive. So if you could shape your questions and, with what or how, or, could you tell me more about that? If you can also, breathe and pause a little bit before, going with your gut reaction sometimes, that also helps to have that difficult conversation. So I think some practical skills, almost like a handbook for some of our leaders to kind of pull out and be able to use, would be necessary action that could be implemented, as soon as I get the call. But I think that's something that we all can do and demonstrate and teach.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I think we may need to go to the audience, because that's always the fascinating one, where they can ask their questions, and our guests will then respond to the questions. If it's a question that will require all of us, as we do at SDIG, we begin to add to the answers, especially for very important questions. I can see that see many people from various parts of the world, and I will say this: if you could be kind, go to the chat room and say where you are coming from. Your name. If you don't want to put your name, you can just say where you're coming from, because we really appreciate you guys. The ideas you are sharing has made us much informed organization, and we intend to continue moving that way. With that, I would like audience to pose questions that they may like. Mr. Adam, you're gonna monitor the chat, and of course you can, if you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and speak up. All right.
Yes, a very good afternoon from London to everybody at this wonderful event. Thank you very much, Dr. Nwye. This is Sedley Adams, SDIG project manager for globally, worldwide, bringing everybody together. I see that, einen schönen guten Tag auch, Herr Chikuma. I see that Malika Simmons has a question, Dr. Nwye.
Okay, go.
Hi, thank you, Sedley. It's more of a comment. So I agree with what Karen was saying, and I posted in the chat a few minutes ago that underlying the whole discussion is respect for individuals' lived experiences, right? And so when we make decisions or create environments or create policy that are in excluding those experiences, that's where we fail. And so I'd really like to know from both of you your take on that, because my experience does not change based on whether or not you believe it. My experience is my experience, and this happens throughout, right? And so leaders, and Karen spoke about this a little bit, leaders who are oblivious that people have experiences that do not happen or not happen based on your belief, is why we run into a lot of problems, because we're waiting for people to believe us that this is how I'm experiencing this workspace. We're waiting for people to believe us that this is what my perceptions are. So could you speak a little bit about whether and how we can get around that need to be believed and just accept people's experiences in order to create better workspaces? Thank you.
Any of you can take it?
Dr. Walker, up to you. Who wants to go first?
I'll jump in briefly on that. It's just, it is hard because we all, by human nature, have bias. And a lot of that is us being able to recognize that in ourselves, and the fact that you can't change anyone else but yourself. And I always try to point back to that issue. Because when we're trying to have difficult conversations, a lot of times our own biases even affect that process. And we're trying to get the other person to understand. If they would just understand this, then everything will be okay. But it's still only in your control what you do and what actions you take. But being able to kind of ask more curious questions to find out, like you said, Malika, about their lived experiences, can kind of bring down some of those walls and help shed light into those blind spots of what our biases are, to better understand, those natural instincts that people have. It could just be one word that actually triggers somebody every time. It doesn't even matter the topic. Excuse me. But that comes from, those lived experiences. And if you're not able to have a conversation around that, that kind of opens the door for more and stronger relationships overall. But go ahead, Robert, I'm gonna give you an opportunity.
Dr. Walker, thank you for those wise words. I agree. And I want to point back to something you said earlier. A lot of times it's a matter of having those questions, understanding that we can just change ourselves, right? And the best we can do, like when we try to forcefully change other people, my experience has been that goes nowhere. So what's better to do? Let's work on ourselves and let's be curious, right? Let's ask those questions. And Dr. Walker made a good point earlier, a very strong point. I'd say most people I know tend to get defensive. What we want to know is why, but when we use the word why, people tend to get defensive, right? So if we can find ways to tactfully craft those questions with what, with how, could you tell me more about, it can really be instructive in better understanding the person and their experiences. And to shift over to what Malika was saying, valuing those experiences that folks have is one of the most powerful things we can do as humans, because one of our core basic needs almost, when you look past food and survival, is the need to be understood and the need to feel important. And so by acknowledging people's experiences, their perspectives, that's where we can really find common ground, I believe, by empathizing and doing our best to understand others and validating them, because every experience somebody has had is real and it's theirs. So I agree, Malika.
Thank you for that. I will just say before turning it over that empathy is huge. And those of you who know me know that everything I do is empathy-based leadership. But it's also important to understand and know that understanding does not equal agreement. And so I think sometimes we get so caught up in having to be right or having that understanding. It's like, oh, you don't understand, when they really mean you don't agree with me. And it's not synonymous. So I appreciate you making that point. I just wanted to also add that that's also a tricky part of getting people to understand that understanding and agreement is not the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That very discussion, I think, is very important. It's like one's identity. We all have our identities, and sometimes, depending on cultural or other aspects of our lives, which is unique to everyone. You may even have a twin, but they brought up in the same family, but they end up having different experiences, and those experiences tend to shape why they behave differently. And I think it's really critical that we understand those biases and understand that when that agreement doesn't necessarily mean that understanding doesn't necessarily mean agreement. And if we understand that, I think we would do better and perhaps reduce some of the things we are having. Like, just imagine the number of people dying in Texas and dying in Florida, and the governors are there saying, no, you cannot do this. It's horrible. If I were advising people who make law, I think there should be law for people who act stupid, and their stupidity results in some causing harm to other people, that they should be held accountable for that. I think that's something that people should be exploring. So thank you very much. More questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Noye. This is Sedley in London. And we have Gretchen, who is in Chicago. And so Gretchen, if you'd like to unmute yourself, and then
Sure.
after you, Manuela.
Sure. Hello. Can you hear me okay? Let me see if I can okay, lower my hand. I just wanted to add to what Malika was saying, and give a shout out to the challenge that we have as humans, which is that we can get kind of caught up in wanting to be right, you know, and the part of the difficulty of that is that we're working against the neurology of our brain, because we actually get a serotonin hit when we move into sort of being right or self-righteous mode. And it feels good to be right, like I'm right, you know, but what it does is that, you know, going for that serotonin hit then comes at the cost of relationship and connection. And so I just think for me, it's helpful to realize that I'm up against the neurology and the chemistry of my brain sometimes, when I can get carried away with not wanting to open up to understand more and wanting to lock down on that I've got it right. And I just really appreciate Malika talking about empathy-based leadership. That is such big grown-up practice, you know, to do that when you want to shout out at somebody, you are so wrong, let me tell you why. But to instead say, you know, tell me more why you think that, or tell me how you got there, because I surely do not get it at all, you know, or some version, you know, more, you know, polished version of that. But this notion of being willing to set aside our mindset and our lens and even the biases that are influencing us to think that we're right in ways that we're not conscious of. And to be able to, as one girlfriend of mine says, put on your grown-up pants and look again and seek to understand beyond what you already understand is really big adult development practice, which is, I think that's the path of leadership. I'm not saying that I'm always good at it, but that seems to be the aspiration of where to go. So that feels like the heart of the matter. Really appreciate your speaking that with Malika. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you very much. And Manuela Evans, very warm welcome to SDIG. And if you'd like to put your thoughts or your questions to the panel.
Yes, first of all, I have to share that every time I attend these meetings, I have this huge anxiety on me. So keep in mind that, because I can sense it in my voice and my heart, my hands shaking. So as I'm listening to everybody, and I've been in so many meetings and panels from here to international, from just regular people to doctors and leaders. And it's very interesting that I've seen old ideas and all of the goals and all of these trainings and diversity and inclusion. And I find it amazing how powerful humanity is actually able to create all of these programs and studies and researches and you name it. But my question is not only for Karen and Robert. My question is actually for everyone in this meeting. So I wrote it because I think it's better for me to express myself like that. So first, the reason why I don't want to make it to Karen or Robert is it's exactly not to dedicate this to someone, because I feel that I can be very aggressive and it causes some tension. So it's for everyone. So I wrote, how can we lead by example on a system that is implemented to block changes? Should we be starting by changing the system itself? I feel like the ideas and practices are indeed great, but very vague. That is the reason we are all still here. To me, it's an imaginary platform with great ideas, but yet not ready to make the change. I heard in this meeting that the pandemic exposed racism. I disagree. The pandemic did not expose the racism. The pandemic simply made all of us, with no exception, understand that there is racism. And in fact, once it hits minorities, it creates issues to everyone, not only minorities. And for the first time, we are forced to see the truth because it's affecting everyone. Now, my question is this. Isn't the foundation of racism and the platform from racism, didn't it came from white people? So why do we have to focus on cultures, different behaviors, different thoughts, and not actually focus on directly in white people and change them with education, for example, creating education right from the beginning in school. So there's these two things. We're doing a lot to change a system that is not changing anything. The president itself needs help. He's a white man. To my point of view, we are very vague with these ideas. So I just want to put that out there because that's the only way I can see this happening. until here, we've been working really hard for changes, and we have spoken, and I jump from meetings to meetings with the same ideas, a lot of educated people, but I don't see it happening.
Sure. Well, I'll jump in. I like everything you had to say, and I don't think it's you being too aggressive. I mean, there's, assertion and assertiveness, and there's different scales of that. So thank you for sharing, and the fact that, you were nervous about sharing. I'll first talk about your comment about how do we lead by example in a system perhaps that's not set up for us to, make change. As I alluded to before, is that everybody has an individual responsibility to make those changes, and we can't ever force anybody to do something, right? And for instance, I work with a lot of different organizations, and there's different levels even of management, right? Senior level management, mid-level management, entry-level management. And sometimes, they have these managers meetings, and they just ask questions, but nobody, you say, are there any questions? And nobody wants to say anything. And so afterwards, when I come in and I meet with them individually, they say, well, we didn't know we were allowed to ask questions, or we didn't know that we were allowed to make decisions. So the higher level management basically is telling them, we want you to do this. And they feel still they need some type of permission. So what I'm saying is we don't need permission to assert ourselves in a lot of these ways and beliefs and ideas, because you can't change anyone else. And so a lot of times I use this acronym called WISE, and it originated actually when working with children from adoption and their trauma, but it can be used in really any element. But the acronym is when you're approached with a situation and it could be really distasteful, right? People saying, to me, and I'm multiracial, and they say, what are you? That used to really drive me nuts and made me upset as I got older. And I kind of understood, like, people were curious, that's not the best way to ask me about my ethnicity or my background. So I would use that as an opportunity to educate. So going back to my acronym WISE, the W is walk away. So that's one option you have when you are approached by other people, right? You always have the option to walk away from that situation. The I stands for ignore or change the subject. So you can ignore that question that the person posed, and you could change the subject to something else that you are comfortable with talking with, this individual about. The S stands for share. You can choose to share something with that individual that you're comfortable with, depending, who that is, if that's where you are. And then the E is educate. So I usually choose to use the E when I get into these situations, because I feel like if I don't say something now, they're going to go to the next person and ask them the same way, what are you? And this just perpetuates over and over. So when I get asked that question now, I usually say, oh, do you mean, my ethnicity, or what's my background, or my, my heritage? And then they're usually like, yes. And, I understand like where they're coming from. And I'll say, well, I prefer if you just ask me it that way. It's a little bit better. I use that as an opportunity to educate them in the moment, and then I'll go ahead and share with them the information. So, but that's just a acronym to help, if you do feel like you're tired of dealing with people, or certain people are ignorant and you don't want to deal with them. I mean, that's just, you always have an option, and you are in control of that.
Thank you so much. Can we hear from Alan Reed?
Hi, thank you, Joseph. I've just been listening in the background. I've had to finish up some work. It's me finished for the day, thankfully, in Scotland. So there's a few issues I want to address what Manuela was talking about. It seemed to me that, so we're focusing on the same problems all the time. We're always going back to the same problems. And I think it's, from where I sit and the problems that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, it's, we narrow in on problems and we separate them out into different sections. So we talk about issues with the racism, issues with homophobia, issues with sexism, and we treat them all as separate when really there's a root. And someone showed it to me and traced it back through history, and the root is, unfortunately, white European cishet male supremacy stems from Europe. And that's, look at me, I'm a white person, I'm in Europe. I appear as a male-bodied person. I think with that, it's then my responsibility to try to fix that, try to fix the system that has set up this oppression and caused the problems that we're all dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But when I'm looking at the solutions, we then, because we're dealing with the problems as separate, we're looking at the solutions as separate as well. And we're not seeing how a solution that solves issues of racism can also be applied, albeit altered and tailored to the problem, that can be applied to other areas like homophobia, sexism, transphobia. I'm dealing with a problem for a client right now where I'm realizing that they've focused in on one demographic, and I'm going, why are we focusing on that demographic? Like, why can't we scale this up and do it for everyone? And that's just sort of where I've come from with it. I feel there's a huge issue with us focusing, not narrowing our focus too much and not realizing that everything is intersectional. And we focus on one thing, we forget the fact that there's, so in the UK, we have 10 protected characteristics. I believe in parts of the States, particularly New York, there's about 20. And it varies in how you identify. And when you get into that, there's so many different characteristics and individual aspects that narrowing the focus to solve it for one group, you miss out everyone else. But then, as Malika said, you have to balance it. You can't solve for a group whilst ignoring the individual experience. If you're ignoring the individual experience, you don't understand how you're affecting people on the ground. You don't understand what's going on. We fail to incorporate the holistic view in a lot of these problems. We narrow in on one issue, but fail to understand the individual, whilst failing to understand how it's all interconnected. And we're in this middle ground doing little. Sorry for rambling a little bit.
I think that was helpful. I think, Alan, what you might be touching on is kind of like the aspect of culture in itself being all inclusive, and not to necessarily point it out as just, culture being race, that, we could have a more expansive picture of that to tackle some issues possibly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walker. Robert Robinson, you have your hand raised. If you would like to address the meeting and let us know your thoughts and your questions for the group or for Dr. Walker and for Robert Mizell.
Right, I wanted to respond to Manuela, and I apologize for being late. Unfortunately, I have a friend who was put on hospice today with cancer. So I was taking care of that business before moving into this business. But Manuela, you and I have been on conferences before, so good to see you. I think I recognize you. And I'm going to throw out a big term, I guess, but we have to think about institutionalized cultural paradigms. And with since this is systemic diversity and inclusion, we have to think about the systems that are in place. So the question is, why don't the perhaps the white people take responsibility for dealing with racism. And we have to look at all the different, in my opinion, we have to look at the different cultures of the world, and we have to look at those that were set up hierarchically, and we have to look at those that were set up communally. And so I will just start with a place where Native Americans had a tribal council, if you will, and they sat in circles and they made decisions as a community-based support system. I look at some tribes anthropologically across Europe and Africa in the early days of man, working as a community to feed each other and support each other to fight off other territorial predators. But then I look at when the Pilgrims came over, they wanted their freedoms, but they brought the rules and systems that they were oppressed by. And so they set up a hierarchical system, if you will. And with their religion, they also followed unconsciously, perhaps, or even consciously, some power structures from Europe. And so from there we go to use the example, and I know I'm being very broad and I'm trying to narrow it down, but we go into the councils of the Pilgrims who wound up burning people at the stake who were left-handed. So because they didn't fit the paradigm. And if you take that back, that goes back to the Spanish Inquisition, you know, with the Catholic Church and so on. So there are issues and rules and leadership that are so ingrained in our institutions that people are unconscious to the fact that they're following them. And we look in our churches, and I'm going to speak to the United States. We look into our Black Southern Baptist churches. We look into our white fundamentalist and Southern Baptist churches, and we have a top-down leadership. And the all-knowing, for example, authority is the pastor, for example. And so, for example, in my opinion, we don't read the Bible and go straight to the core of the context. We listen to what the man in charge says. And so we listen to the man in the pulpit rather than the man way upstairs in the heavens, if you will, in that religious context. Likewise, the reference was made to the president of the United States or whoever's in charge. We listen to him without following the rules and the science, which goes back to Dr. Joe about the pandemic and things. We don't follow the science. We listen to the man in charge. And the man in Florida is the man in charge who's listening to the former man in charge in the White House. And so they're grandstanding in ways that they feel is right in their unconscious, but also their conscious, to follow a political system that was laid in place hundreds and hundreds of years before. And that may seem bizarre as well, but that's what's going on. And so we have to change what's called our collective consciousness to work in groups and teams to survive this. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's the ones you're talking about herd immunity, for example. We need a herd immunity against racism.
Thank you so much.
This is something really quick. Mr. Robert, I really, really respect your opinion. But when you say we have to work in collective, which I totally agree, but I want you to understand that it's not Black people that is causing the racism. So when you or any white person comes to me and tell me to work collective, I have to tell you that I don't have the responsibility to teach any white person how to respect a Black person. I think what we need to have in collective is the sympathy, yes, the compassion and the kindness in our hearts. Yet it's very hard to work with white people when they are the cause for my suffering. I was born, as soon as I was born, my color, my skin was already a discrimination right there. So at this point, at 50 years old, I can only work with white people if they accept that they need to make changes from themselves, that they need to change the system. It's extremely hard for me to do more than that.
And I agree. And I'm going to correct my verb. I'm going to change must to need. We need to. And I agree with you because I'm an invisible minority in that I'm gay. You don't have to tell your parents your skin color, but you do have to tell your parents your sexual orientation. So sometimes as a minority of color, you have an intact support group. As a person who passes can pass in my flannel shirt today as a straight white male from the South, that wasn't the case. So being excluded based on my mannerisms as a young man and a skinny white boy in the South in the 60s and 70s, people noticed my feminine characteristics growing up. So I had to either assimilate or die. And that was my difficulty and choices: assimilate, die, or move to a safer place like San Francisco or New York City or Atlanta, where I chose to go. I found my refuge there. But I'm with you on that, Manuela, 100%. The responsibility lies on the racists themselves. But in order to achieve, in order to motivate them for willing to change, it would be nice to have, and there is a need to have, a collective consciousness among the non-racists to say this is no longer acceptable. And
we did that already over and over and over. Why people are not going to leave the privilege to give us a place? That's out of question. We have done that for many years. It's 50 years. I lived 50 years in the system that is not allowing me to be who I want to be just because of the color of my skin. It's not going to happen. That's why I'm here to say we are not going nowhere until it's changed, until white people understand that the change needs to be. Because look, you gay, you face problems. Imagine a black person that is gay. She gotta go from being gay, from being black. It's not going to change. Unfortunately, you know, this group, we are willing to work and change it, but it's not enough. It's not enough. We need to stop seeing this like, we all going to work, it's going to change. This is not an imaginary story. It's not happening. It never will. What people?
Well, I want to chime in on that, because I do feel that it's not enough to say it's not our responsibility to teach others, because I mean, just like with our children, you know, you have a responsibility to teach. If they're not treating someone respectfully, or if they're talking to you in a disrespectful way, you use that moment to say, you know, I don't like that, or, you know, do it this way. It's a course correction. I think it's the same in the real world. If they continue to treat people a certain way, and this could be anyone, it's a course correction of behavior. I don't know that it can be just labeled racism when you're not addressing the actual behavior that they're doing. And I think that is our responsibility, each individual's responsibility, to make that correction, because that's how we can move forward. If you are being disrespected, yes, we have, you know, groups that are, you know, helpful for that, but I'm saying it's also helpful to educate what these behaviors are, because just to label it all under racism, I don't think is a catch-all. Just as some others were talking about, that culture is all inclusive. I mean, it's race, it's gender, it's sexual identity, it's, you know, socioeconomic status. It could be so many different things, and we still have a responsibility to educate others in the ways that they may be disrespecting our culture.
So if we are, and we have done that, how come we're still in the same place? It's not changed. Nothing changed.
I don't know what place, it's all individualized, you know. So I mean, if
individual, but we live. So when the pandemic came and hit, and white people, rich people, started to see that, looking at the communities where I did 1 year serving in Boston, I saw how my community suffered worse than what they were suffering. Suffering already, but we pretend we didn't see it. We all knew about racism. it's just this conversations of warm paths that is not leading us somehow to the higher place. I don't think it's my responsibility, and I tell you why, because I am born from a white man and a black woman. Okay, so when I see that, I see that my father, being a white man, he was always privileged, you know, and my mom was a slave in Angola. So when I look at the big picture and you telling me it's my responsibility as an individual to educate a white man, it will change my neighbors. But at the end of the day, when she's with her group, she's gonna go to her own mode. This is a global thing. It's something that it's in the hands of white people, not in my hands, not in the hands of the Black communities to educate them. Look, I saw a Black man being killed in plain day, and we had to fight to go to court for the white man to be charged when we all knew it was a murder. It's happening every day to Black people. So to me, these conversations are just mild to what is actually deep inside. Plus, at this point, with all this pandemic, what I see, it's a traumatizing society where white people are completely traumatized and they're not being fixed, and they traumatized us from the beginning. So it's a global
Manuela,
problem.
excuse me, Manuela, I get your point. And there was a book I wrote, I think in 2019. Essentially, it looks at how we are shaped. Each and every one of us are born in a particular place. And where you are born, you breathe the air, you eat the food, you live with people within that particular environment. You develop a very strong affinity with them to the point that you believe what they believe. Now, when you go through that, what happens is that you cannot divorce those experiences, whether they're good or bad, from your behavior. Now, I had two people. One person happened to be gay. The other person happened to be of a different type. So what I try to do, which I also use to illustrate in the book, is for them to find intersectionality, where they share the same pain, even though they're different. And when you get people talking about it, I agree with what you are saying, the anguish, the pain that you observe such situation going on. And for people to say they don't see it, it's like belittling your intelligence. And quite often we see it. But would that be well, under that situation, what do you do? Now, you have this receptive audience that will listen to what you are saying, and some of them will understand what you are saying. Some may have not understood because of the conceptualization of how they were shaped, because they cannot divorce their belief based on the environment they were shaped. If you recall, the guy that went to South Carolina and went to the church of all places and killed 9 people, he didn't write much, but the very little he wrote, which I read all of them, gave me a view of the individual. I actually was in a debate where I defended him. And my defending him wasn't because he didn't do some evil things. I was defending him to make a larger point. The family that groomed him, nurtured him, as some of the things he articulated, we are along the line of, they always talk, no action. Talk, no action. So this 21-year-old saw himself as soldiers see themselves when they go to war. So he went there to kill those people. And when he killed innocent 9 people, those who had cultivated the fertile ground to groom him all snuck out. And for me, I thought that the real culprit would be those who nurtured it. So when you look at racism, it's the same thing. It's like if you go to Germany, before you become a police officer, you have to be trained for 2.5 years. Why? Because they're reflecting what the genocide of Jewish people. These are people who understood those things. So when they're training their police, they try to let them know. Contrast that to here. If you're in some southern states where racism still like it's an open season, people don't talk about it, but it's real. So what happens in that situation is this: they groom someone, they want to be a police officer. In 3 weeks, 3 months or less, the person becomes a police officer. They give the person badge, they give the person gun, and say go. So those socio-cultural belief systems that had been groomed, ingrained in those individuals, can never be divorced from their behavior. So I'm saying this to say that this is the type of environment where open engagement is still very critical. In fact, the only option to addressing these issues. If you say, well, you don't want to say this, or all white people are not the same. There are very, very many good white people. In fact, when I think of Ted Kennedy, former senator that passed away a number of years ago, he was, in many ways, she championed issues of equity and social justice. Are there evil people out there? You bet. How do we solve it? How do we deal with them? Maryland just enacted the law. You see, Maryland enacted historic police accountability measures this Saturday, becoming the first state to repeal its powerful law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights and setting new rules for when police may use force and how they are investigated and disciplined. Now, under the old rule, they do whatever they want. They lie, they fabricate information. But this is something that could help. And by engaging and fighting and contacting those who are in position of power, that's the best way to change it. Frustration and anger can drive you to make changes, but meaningful change will only occur through this type of engagement. And that's why I will urge you to stay the course. Come to the meetings, because sometimes you get some people who give you really something that will nurture you. Cornel West said, you have to surround yourself with people who will calm you down, otherwise you go crazy, when he talks about race. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I can say is that it will take all of us. If you're a white person, you have to be stronger, because as a white person, when you say things that are not consistent with normal way people should be treated, some people may be apt to hearing you, but when a Black person who has been subjected to a horrible situation says it, those people who have been ingrained to believe that they are right, they will never change. So I will urge you to continue engagement with people. I saw your connection with Robinson, and I think that engagement will lead to a higher contour and better understanding, perhaps better policy issues of our time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Nwaye. This is Sedley here in London. Dr. Walker has a meeting that she has to go to. So just very quickly, before bringing in Ms. Mitchell, I'd just like to give Dr. Walker the opportunity to just round up her thoughts before she has to leave this group, which, as I indicated, will be continuing until 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So Dr. Walker, in appreciation of your time, if you'd just like to give us your final thoughts before you have to go.
Well, no, thank you for that. I do have to run to another meeting, but I appreciate everybody's feedback. I mean, that's the way we continue to grow, as Dr. Noah even said, as individuals, and these engagements are necessary, not always the most comfortable for most people, but they're definitely necessary. And I don't think by any means, I wanted to leave you by, thinking that this was too aggressive or assertive. I enjoyed the conversation. Just always, take an opportunity to look at ourselves, and that's what I would like to leave you with is, starting within, and then being able to, look to others as well. So I think it's important to do self-awareness first, and then being able to help others.
Dr. Walker, thank you very much indeed. And Heather, we wish you a very good afternoon. I'd like to hand over to Dr. Nwaye to introduce Ms. Mitchell, who has had her hand raised for a few moments. And on a personal note, I would just like to reach out, reach out just very quickly to Manuela on a personal level. In terms of anxiety, it is something that as an individual, I'm very familiar with, as many of us probably are. But I'd like to reach out on a personal level to say thank you for taking the time to overcome that personal anxiety, as Dr. Nwaye would say, whether black, white, or anything in between, because when you scared, you scared. Doesn't matter who you are, and it's a fantastic thing that you've taken the trouble to overcome that anxiety to contribute here. Dr. Nwaye, we have Ms. Mitchell coming up next.
All right, Ms. Mitchell, go
Hello
ahead.
and good Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So far, this has been a really delicious conversation, and I've taken some notes on a couple of things that I'd like to respond on. And I agree with you, Dr. Noe, that you can't separate yourself from where you're from. I am a city girl. I'm born and raised native Washingtonian from DC. And everywhere I go, in any part of the world, I take that with me. Manuela, I appreciate your words and I appreciate the sentiment. As a woman of color, the last couple of years have been very interesting. And what I call the current conversation that we're having as a society, as a world, we've opened Pandora's box. And now that the box is open, we're not planning on closing it. And I think that we keep the conversation going by making sure we do what you did today. We speak up and we speak out because it isn't right. It is a fact that racism and sexism are illogical, unequivocally illogical. As you stated, skin tone and our sex, that is nothing that any of us are responsible for. So therefore, who decides what M&M is the best? They are all beautiful colors. They all have delicious chocolate, and if you're fortunate, a peanut inside. That's diversity. So if not now, then when? And for me, it's now. And for me, I am committed to having the conversations like we're having today. And your words and your spirit and your conviction, Manuela, has definitely touched others on this call in some way, shape, or form. So thank you for your words. When we talk about change, it happens one person at a time, and that's a conversation. And there's several methodologies for change, to impact change. I subscribe to the ADKAR, which was created by ProSci, which is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. That change happens when people are aware that change needs to occur. That in order for change to happen, there has to also be a desire to change. Then we need to move to knowledge. We need to teach people how to change if they don't know how. And then there's the ability. Do you have, or that person have the ability to change? And then it's reinforcing the change. And that's the methodology that works with organizations. It works with individuals. But every aspect, that methodology needs to be taught. So there was, I'm not sure who said it, but how do we make the change? And we're going to need to do that through a critical mass, whether it's through, as Robert, you mentioned, the LGBTQIA community, whether it's through Black women, whether it's through Latina women, whether it's through our rainbow of M&Ms. It's going to be a critical mass. That's the conversation that I definitely want to continue. It's understanding that these conversations are invaluable, and how do we have more of them with the people who we need to have these conversations with? Because I think that most of us that are on this call are part of the choir. And the goal for me that I am owning is having more of these conversations when I know they need to be had, instead of walking away and not taking the time or not wanting to exert the energy in that moment, but pushing myself to have the conversation that needs to be had. And so that's my challenge for everyone on the call, is to continue to have those conversations one person at a time. And it's the power of one. It's Gandhi, it's MLK. It's one person at a time. And I think we sometimes forget the power of one, because we live in a society that focuses on conformity. And we have to put on our, I think, I didn't see her name, mentioned it earlier. We have to put on our big people boots or our big people pants. And we have to call it out. Maya Angelou would say, stop it. When she was in the presence of someone who was disrespectful, she was teaching them in that moment, stop it. It is unacceptable. So I think we need to have more conversations, and using some of the words Robert and Karen, Dr. Walker mentioned, I'm curious. I'm curious why you chose that, or I'm curious about the decision that was made. So for me, the conversation has, again, it's been delicious. It's always an opportunity to attempt to understand others, because I can't appreciate something that I don't understand. So the goal is to seek to understand first, but also to take the time as a part of this conversation, the rest of the conversations, as long as I have breath, to continue to say what needs to be said in a way that I think someone can appreciate it and hear it with a great deal of respect and empathy. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mitchell. Dr. Nwaye.
Yeah, hi. I think that Felix sort of really brought it home. And I'll say it this way. Let's begin to look at ourselves as individuals and begin to pose the question, how can we continue to move the needle? Margaret Mead, an American anthropologist, reminds us that that's only what brings us to change. Individuals work. What I'll add to it is that, Manuela, I understand the anguish you could have gone by experiencing things and looking at and seeing it with your naked eyes and be asking, am I dreaming? No, it's real. So those things could shape you to the point where you can begin to undermine even progressive supporters, people who are called supporters. And that's human experience. But what I will tell this group is this. We need to continue, as Phyllis said again, this engagement is critical. If we throw it out, we know that we are actually creating more chaos. So again, as I said before, we have to begin to look at ourselves as individuals, begin to ask the question, what can we do to move the needle forward? What can we do in our collective quest for peace, equity, and social justice for all? I intentionally read the thing that came from Baltimore, or rather in Maryland, it came out on Saturday, because police had always had, this unwritten laws and even written laws to act with impunity. And when you talk about racist, just imagine places like Mississippi. I'm sorry I'm mentioning names. Places where when you go, it's like it was even before 1960 that they don't get it. So what do you do? Maryland has set the example, because inherent in that particular decision is the fact that they will be able to figure what one does, not necessarily to do something and have this privilege to do it and nobody checks on that. Now they will be held accountable, at least to some extent. So that's good. But more discussion, more engagement, writing, discussing it in a very intelligent way will shame people who are really bad. At least they hide when they do bad things. But by and large, it will help to bring right-minded individuals who believe in equity and social justice for all to continue to strive. And that's when it comes to number. There's something about number. As we are speaking now, they have up to 48 bills being advanced to prevent people from voting. In fact, if you go to 1960s and read the comments Martin Luther King made, that these people who are blocking vote is because they know they don't have majority of American people. And this majority of American people, Dr. King was saying, it's not just Black people, because there are some really people with good mind and want to do good that are white. There are some people who are just uninformed. As I said earlier, when you shape your belief system based on circumstances that is outside your control, that's who you are. You can't change it, but it takes engagement with people who would dramatically show you how you are wrong, and you'll be seeing it with your naked eyes that you are wrong. At that time, what former Stanford professor called cognitive dissonance will set in, and that's when that change occurs. So that's what I can tell you, because the pain and anguish of those who suffer is unimaginable. It's real. But for those who don't even understand, but if you were turned around and is in their shoes, they will. So what's our responsibility? To keep working, to turn it around so that it will be on their shoes, perhaps. We're not gonna hope on that, but perhaps our work could yield some fruit. So I think, yeah. So do you have any more comments or any question that or something you would like us to talk about? Next.
I have a quick question.
Go, you go.
I was listening to you, and I have to thank Miss Felicia for, I'm really grateful for what you said. But I have been trying to Google any organization out there that is working on white people stopping being racist. And I'm having a hard time finding it. However, I find a lot of organizations and groups of Black people supporting each other and working on a change. So I was wondering if anyone has or knows an organization that is all white people and they're trying to stop being racism. So they go out there, they do a lot of no racism. I want to see that because I haven't found it. So that's right there creates to me a lot of thoughts. However, when I Googled, it's funny that I Googled a list, how many organizations exist from white people to stop racism. I could not find, and the first thing that comes in the list of Google is list of white nationalist organizations. And then explains white nationalism is a political ideology which advocates for, so pretty much they support the separation. So I'm going to stop talking because I can't deal with this. Like it's me.
Manuela, one of the things I'd like to, I'm sorry, one of the things I like to say, first of all, Google is a trap, just so you know, right? So you fall down the Google rabbit hole, but I literally, while you were talking, it all depends on, you know, seeking you shall find. You ever hear that, right? So I literally Google whites against racism, and there are so many organizations that are out there. So I get what you're saying in theory, right? And so you're like, hey, where are these people? It always exists, no matter what you think of, just because of the human mind, whatever you think of, there are people out there that are doing that thing. So it is exasperating, obviously, when you feel like you're looking, you're not finding, but I would encourage you to be lighthearted that they do exist, right? So literally tweaking the words, I found several different whitesforracialequality.org, bethechange.com. There are several of them out there. So they do exist. And what happens is we see with our bias, we see with our eyes. So when you go out and you're looking for something, although you are searching for it in your heart, and I'm an energy worker, so I do believe that energy translates through your feelings. When you are seeking to see that there's nothing out there, you will get nothing back, right? So just like I would like to sit that with you.
Thank you so much for creating the awareness in me, and I'm going to deeply look into it. I just hope they continue to build more.
Yes.
And I hope to see deeply changes. But so far, so I don't consider the way I vision as a bias. Because
no, I meant the bias toward the Google search. That's all. Okay. not the entire thing.
So yeah. I'm glad you see it. Yeah. But I feel that even though they exist, the other side is more powerful. I'm still like, so I still come always from the perspective of feeling negative because I suffer that every single day. And I can explore more, like even saying, for example, I had people that are Jewish explaining to me, like, we've been through a lot. But guess what? My supervisor been through a lot in her journey for being Jewish. But if we go to a supermarket, me and her, she's not going to be followed because she's white and I'm black. So at the end of the day, discrimination against Black people is so strong that it's to me, it's very vivid and very hard to accept. And for that, I feel the need to say, I want more. I want you guys to do more. I am not going to help nobody to do it. Just change it, the system. Like even trainings, we are trained as Black people, we are trained to go out there and know that we are discriminated when we go find a job. We are trained to understand that. So how do you feel as a Black woman when you go out there and you know that you already cut it off? How do you feel when you go for a job? So the system is all screwed up and someone needs to do the change. And I don't think it's Black people, we want to change it. They won't let us. So, I mean, as much energy positive, you just gave me a great sense of love and kindness, but I continue to say, like, I can't be kindest, but above all, I need to be honest.
You know, Manuela, whenever you speak, I think it really resonates with me. But as I said, Malika said, when you are searching for something, in fact, when you ask that question, I have a couple of people that are in white, essentially white group that are fighting for equity and social justice for all. But if you look on the other side, you have zillions of white supremacist organizations. Again, that's why they were shipped. I think we have some, Alan, you have your hand up. Could you comment, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to address it. I think it's great. Malika found all those organizations. I think Robert's put one in the chat as well. But for me, I can address the racism that I see, but I don't understand how it affects people. And I can only ever understand that to a certain extent because I have never experienced it, and I will likely never experience any form of racism. I live in Scotland, where our ethnic minority is 4% of the population. But I still see it as my responsibility to do something about it, so I have to listen to other people's experiences. I work for a small consultancy firm. Our CEO is a black man from London. Most of our staff are actually black Nigerian, or the biggest proportion of our staff are black Nigerian. One of my colleagues runs anti-racism training, and I'm being upskilled to deliver that with her. So there is, whilst it's not an all-white organisation in the UK doing it, I, as a white person, still want to get to the point where I can teach other white people how to be anti-racist. And there will be groups like that, and it will always start small. There will always be a superiority thing. So the white supremacy groups might currently have the numbers in comparison to white anti-racist groups, but it's a snowball effect. We keep going, we keep growing, we keep pushing, and eventually that table will turn. You've had a backlash in the Western world, particularly in the States and here in the UK, where the whites are trying to turn it around and say they're now the oppressed majority. And that comes from, because we had such a huge civil rights movement in the US that's filtered over to the UK, things changed really fast. And then it's like an elastic band. You can only pull it so far before it springs back the other way. And that's what we're experiencing right now. We're experiencing that elasticity effect where society is rejecting the changes. It's temporary. If we keep pushing, we keep fighting, especially people who look like they fit in the majority, like me. And Robert mentioned that he is a gay man. I'm a non-binary pansexual person in Scotland, where I still get asked, what does that mean, on a day-to-day basis. But if we keep pushing and fighting, eventually society will get used to that change, and they'll no longer have the effect of the elastic band. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alan. Let's hear from Mark. Could you comment very quickly? We are running out of time, please.
Thank you very much for letting me share in some words. Manuel, I heard your words, and the way you shared them made me feel like, wow, there's so much behind those words that you probably have encountered and have gone through. And at the same time, if I had to think about myself as a white person, but then I would go as a white woman, and then as a white working class woman, in the world. Even if I'm from Spain, so not from the USA, but I also have my background. I also have, of course, my unconscious bias probably. But what I wanted to share with you all, as you mentioned, these white organizations against racism, as an educator, well, honestly, I don't know if those organizations exist or not. And Malaika said that there are some, of course, yeah. I just wonder, well, why only white people should be there? I believe in the power of everybody. I believe in the power of one person contacting, getting to know another person, a very different person from somewhere else in the world. It doesn't matter about skin color. It doesn't matter about our sexual orientation. It doesn't really matter if I wear glasses or not. There are so many different traits and characteristics that can set us apart. Or at the same time, in the end, aren't we all human beings? So that's, as an educator, I've tried to promote that in the learners and the students I have always come across. And I've taught from 3 to 18 years old for many years. And even if those organizations wouldn't exist, I
think that there's so much that can be done through education, for instance. And sometimes it's not about what you teach, but about how you walk, what you show. So much more than words, I would say it's the way, you know, we are in front of other people to model those attitudes towards other people. And as a teacher of English as a foreign language, I've always tried to share with my students my passion to know people from all over the world through English, through another language for us, apart from Spanish. And thanks to that, my purpose was, okay, why not, you know, teaching a language, another language, so people can connect with each other, you know, people from different countries, from different parts of the world, to unite, to get, you know, to know other people. And I think, and I believe that that contact can make a change. And I just wanted to share that with you. And I hope that it resonates. And because I was really sorry, especially Manuela, to hear your words. And at the same time, Felice, you made me feel like there's, you know, energy there to one person at a time can make a change, of course, and I believe it. Thank you.
Mark and Omessa, thank you very, very much. From London to Spain, Dr. Nwaye, I have to hand over to you. We are running sharply out of time. If you would like to wrap up this fantastic session, for anybody that would like to find contact details for the next session on the 18th of August, or August 18th, as our American cousins like to say, then please go to the chat. You will find that our flipbook and details are there. It has been a wonderful opportunity to have everybody here together. Too many to name, but I'd like to thank most particularly our featured guest, Robert Mizell, MBA, as well as Dr. Karen Walker. I'd just like to hand over now to Dr. Joseph Nwaye, just to wrap up with our sincere thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon. Dr. Nwaye. I think you have you still on mute, Dr. Nwaye.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Adam. I want to tell you that I appreciate each and every one of you, the depth and through discussions, honest discussions, how you truly express the issues we have at hand. These are very difficult issues, but you know what? It will take all of us to solve it. I would therefore say that you gotta be looking at more. There are some people who are talking about not teaching about critical race theory, and I would say no. In fact, we're gonna be teaching it, because education is about learning. It's not about choosing what is convenient and then change what is not what is uncomfortable. Education is about teaching all. So on the 18th, we have really high skillful professionals, and the way they were selected were very thought through. We will have a lawyer who has actually helping legislators craft the kind of policies that will be going to the heart of what you are saying, Manuela. Again, that's why I said to you that it takes engagement. It takes all of us. With committed people like the people I see under the SDIG, there's no mountain we cannot climb. So what I can tell you is we got gonna steadily building, supporting those who are truly fighting for equity and social justice for all. I see Attorney Myers is here. He's one of the speakers that will be coming on the 18th. And I have the other one is someone whom I regard very highly. She's you know, she's in New York, one of the, but she's all over the world. When you hear her, she's magical. So I will encourage you to, you know, sort of save that 18th, because it will take all of us. And there are so many other things we can be doing together. By working together, as I said, there's no mountain we cannot climb. So that's what I can say to you guys. And thank you for your patience. We are running a little bit, but on that note, I think we want to close it here, but I'll hope to see you on the 18th.